Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yay.
Hello.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Yes, we hear you fine.
All right. Hi. Got a few people who are feeling good today. That makes me happy. All right, so let's see. What are we even doing? We are doing lecture 6. Can you believe it? Lecture 6 already. It's just crazy. Hi, I see people writing in the chat box. Hi. Yeah, so let's just get into it. I know, let me change this view here. I know you guys did your exam. I haven't looked at the grades yet because obviously you had until 6 p.m. today to complete it, which may explain why we have 10 participants in the class right now instead of the almost 40 that are in this class, because people are probably rushing from finishing that. Yes, happy Wednesday. Yeah, so hopefully that was pretty straightforward. I'll look at the exams later this week. Let me turn this off. But in general, if you're doing well on the quizzes, usually the exam is pretty straightforward. At least that's my experience in teaching this class for as long as I've taught it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get to it. Let me find, where is my doodad? See, this is why I do the, this is why the pre-recorded lectures have their charm, right? Because I don't have to look for my PowerPoint slides in the pre-recorded. Okay, share. Yeah, and hopefully also the pre-recorded lectures you guys are enjoying okay. I know it's not quite the same because you don't get to interact with me quite in the same manner. But for certain classes where there's a lot of material, I know it is handy to be able to pause and take a break and walk away. Students in the past have told me that they think both formats are great, particularly because I upload the recordings of the live lectures anyways. So yeah, so the next 2 classes I think are going to be pre-recorded. At least lecture 7 for sure is going to be pre-recorded because that's probably the longest lecture in the entire course. So it's best to do that one pre-recorded. Let me see my key. Cool. All right. Yep. So let's get to it. Hopefully you can see the slides. If you can't see the slides, let me know. All right. Oops. Just navigating all these boxes. Okay, let's get to it. Let's get to it. I keep saying that, right? So you just finished lecture exam 1. Oh boy. But just so you know, I told you, summers go quick. So the next lecture exam is actually 2 weeks from today. I know. So stay focused, stay with it, don't fall asleep at the wheel. We're almost done with the course and you guys have made it this far. So just stay focused. I will be posting a study guide for lecture exam 2 either today or tomorrow. Yeah. All right, what are we going to cover today? Today is going to be a little bit more, it's going to start off a little biology heavy because you're seeing these big scary words, mitosis and meiosis, which as non-science majors might not ring any bells. You may have in high school, depending on where you went to high school, hopefully they still talk about mitosis and meiosis in high school. But if they don't, and these words are completely unfamiliar to you, I will walk you through it. And then we're going to talk about something that's a little complicated, which is alternation of generations, which is something unique to plants. And that alternation involves 2 stages of the plant life cycle, the Gametophyte plant and the Sporophyte plant. And we'll talk about that today. And then lastly, we'll get introduced to some real life plants in the plant kingdom, in particular the non-vascular plants, which are mosses, liverworts, hornworts, and we'll talk a little bit about asexual reproduction. Okay. First, we have to talk about these biological processes, mitosis and meiosis, and both of these are types of cell division. So already in this course, we've learned about different types of cells, right? We've covered a lot of different types of cells. And we've already talked about growth. In particular, we've talked about primary and secondary growth. And in primary growth, we talked about those apical meristems where cells are dividing to grow new tissue, right? Well, in order for cells to divide, in order for cells to grow new tissue, they have to divide. So that's one type of cell division. And then we'll talk about meiosis, which deals with sex. All right, so first let's talk about mitosis. So what is mitosis? Mitosis is a type of cell division whose job is for growth and the repair of body cells. So mitosis occurs in the body cells. What do I mean by body cells? I mean any cell of a plant's body in this case, but even your body that doesn't deal with sex. So body cells could be skin cells, body cells could be blood cells, body cells could be bone cells, right? Body cells. If you're talking about sex cells like eggs and sperm, that's something else. We'll talk about that later. So mitosis occurs in body cells. And just so you know, and this, we will talk about what this means on the subsequent slides coming up, but just so, but just so you know, this word here, I gotta get rid of this, and I gotta change color to, let's use black. If you're talking about body cells, so for example, skin cells or blood cells or bone cells, body cells are what are called diploid cells or 2N, and I will explain that as we go on. So mitosis involves body cells that are diploid. Mitosis is a type of cell division. And after mitosis occurs, you're going to have two cells. So you're going to start with one cell, and that cell is going to divide, and you're going to end up with two cells. And those two cells are going to be genetically identical to each other, and we call them daughter cells. Both of those daughter cells are going to have the same chromosome number, meaning both of the daughter cells are also going to be diploid. And I'll explain what diploid means. But think of it this way. If you have a skin cell and it divides into two skin cells, those two new skin cells are going to be just like that original skin cell, except that there's two now, right? So if the original skin cell was diploid, the daughter cells are also going to be diploid when you're talking about mitosis. So not only do both daughter cells have the same number of chromosomes, but they also, like I just said, have the same number of chromosomes as the original cell, which we call mother cell. And these terms, daughter cell and mother cell, these are just terms that have historically been used. I don't know if they're going to be getting updated, but that's what we still call them. All right, so that's mitosis. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by this process. So here's, maybe you're a visual learner, right? So I give you this little schematic here, which shows you a very simplified, because there's a lot of steps in mitosis that we don't cover in this class because it's basic plant science, but this is a very simplified schematic of what happens during mitosis. You start off with a diploid or 2N mother cell, maybe it's a skin cell. That 2N mother cell is going to undergo the process of mitosis, and the result is two daughter cells that both have the same chromosome number, 2N. So same chromosome number as each other, but also same chromosome number as the original mother cell right up here. All right. And on the bottom, you can see a little summary. Okay. So when I say growth and repair, growth of body cells and repair of body cells. So you can even think of a human, right? When you have a little human, little baby, that little baby needs to grow more cells in order to grow up into a grown-up human, right? And so that's going to involve mitosis. And since this is a basic plant science, yeah, you might have guessed it, the same thing is true for plants. If you have a little baby plant inside of a seed, that little baby plant inside of a seed can't become a mature grown-up plant without growing new body cells, and that's going to occur via mitosis. Another thing mitosis is used for is for repair. So maybe you've fallen and skinned your knee before, which really sucks and hurts, right? But maybe you've done that. And what happens when you skin your knee? Well, all the cells that got skinned are damaged, and they can't go on to perform the function of skin anymore because they've been damaged. So what happens? The cells around those damaged cells will undergo the process of mitosis to grow new skin cells to repair that damaged area. And as you can see here on the right, we see a part of a plant. So the same thing happens in plants. If a plant gets damaged, the process of mitosis will be used to grow new cells to repair the damage. All right, so that's mitosis. Mitosis is pretty straightforward of the two, of the mitosis versus meiosis. Mitosis for growth, mitosis for repair of body tissues, pretty straightforward. Meiosis is a little bit more involved. So when mitosis was used for growth and repair of body cells, meiosis, and that's how you say that word, this is meiosis, right? Meiosis is used for ultimately making gametes, egg and sperm, gametes, egg and sperm. And in this class, when you hear this word, gametes, I want you to immediately in your brain think egg and sperm, gametes, egg and sperm, gametes, egg and sperm. And I will say it like that to help you remember. It's good to know the word gametes. It'll help you remember things as we go forward. So meiosis is for ultimately making gametes, egg and sperm. So meiosis occurs in sex cells, not body cells, sex cells. However, those sex cells are still diploid. They are still diploid, just to point that out. And meiosis, which is also a process of cell division, just like mitosis, will ultimately lead to the production of gametes, egg, and sperm. But there's a big difference here in that those products of meiosis won't be diploid anymore. They will be haploid, or 1N. So the chromosome number, via the process of meiosis, the chromosome number is reduced in the new cells. And remember, we're talking sex cells here. So, whereas in mitosis, you ended up with 2 daughter cells that were both diploid, just like the mother cell, in meiosis, you actually end up with 4 daughter cells. All of the daughter cells are going to have the same chromosome number as each other. They're all going to be haploid, or 1N. But all of those daughter cells will have half the number of chromosomes as the original mother cell, which was diploid, or 2N, right? So that might be like, whoa, that's kind of confusing. Well, let's look at it visually. So here we have a sex cell. This could be right here. This could be a cell in the testicles. This could be a cell in the ovaries, right? If you're thinking about humans. So a sex cell in there. And that sex cell is diploid, or 2N. And that sex cell is going to go through the process of meiosis, which actually involves 2 stages, but we don't need to learn those in this class. But suffice it to say that the diploid sex cell goes through meiosis, and the result is 4 daughter cells. And these daughter cells all have the same chromosome number as each other, which is 1N, or you can say that they are haploid. But they have half of the chromosomes as the original mother cell, which was diploid. All right. So you might think to yourself, why? Why do we have to have half of the chromosomes? Well, remember, we're talking about egg and sperm. Egg and sperm. So Let's see if I want, yeah, okay, good. All right. So why do we have to have half the number of chromosomes? The reason why is because we're talking about sex cells, egg and sperm, and I will talk about that as we go forward. So in animals, and up here it says in humans, right? Because we're animals. But in animals, the production, meiosis leads directly to the production of gametes, egg and sperm. So what that means, if you were to go back here, if we were talking about a human, so here's, let's say the cell is in the testicles and it's diploid, it's going to go through the process of meiosis, and it will lead directly to the production of 4 haploid sperm. Because in animals and in humans, which are animals, meiosis leads directly to gametes, which is what this is showing you in a not very intuitive way. But just note that, yeah, in humans and animals, meiosis leads directly to the production of gametes, egg, and sperm. And so this is a good place to kind of figure out why we have to have half of the chromosomes in the products of meiosis, and this is why. So taking humans as an example, let's change colors to red. So this is a different schematic showing kind of the same thing. Here's our human sex cell that's diploid. Let's say it's in the testes, right? Or let's say it's in the ovaries of a in that scenario. Well, humans, all species have a specific set of chromosomes for their species. And in humans, we have 46 chromosomes in our cells. So if you were to take a skin cell, or a blood cell, or a bone cell, or a cell from inside the testes or the ovaries, those cells would all have 46 chromosomes, because that's the number of chromosomes that human species has in their cells. But to make a new human, you have to have egg and sperm come together to make a new human. And so the sperm cannot have 46 chromosomes, and the egg cannot have 46 chromosomes, because if the sperm had 46 chromosomes and the egg had 46 chromosomes, when sperm and egg fuse, the result would be something that has what, 92 chromosomes. That's no good. That's not going to work. So that's why we have meiosis, because meiosis takes cells in the sex organs, and via meiosis, you get haploid gametes in humans, right? So now we have a sperm that's haploid. Look, 1N, oops. Look, 1N versus 2N in the original cell. So now we have haploid sperm and haploid egg, such that when haploid sperm and haploid egg fuse together in the process of fertilization, the resulting individual will have the correct number of chromosomes, which is 46, not 92. So that's why we have meiosis. Just so you know, so it's because there's so many different species, and all the species have different numbers of chromosomes. Even in plants, some plants have 16 chromosomes, some plants have 43 chromosomes. It's kind of all over the place. It's too difficult to remember those numbers, and so we don't worry about the numbers. We just worry about 2N versus N, or diploid versus haploid. That way we don't have to worry about 46, 23, all these other things. Right, okay. Hopefully that makes it a little clear. So as I said, in humans and other animals, meiosis leads directly to the production of gametes. You have meiosis occur, and then whammo, you have sperm, or meiosis occurs and whammo, you have eggs. In plants are a little more complicated. Meiosis does not lead directly to gametes, egg, and sperm. Instead, in plants, meiosis results in the production of spores. of spores. I'll use, oh my gosh, where this thing keeps going away. I'll use blue. In plants, meiosis leads to the production of spores that are haploid. And those spores are actually going to grow into plants that we call gametophyte plants. And it's those plants that are going to grow the gametes, egg and sperm. So this, I'm sure right now you're feeling very confused, and that's totally normal. This is this is different than what we're used to dealing with in the animals. Spores, gametophyte plants, what? So let's look at it. Right. So, right. I guess I should look at this slide a little closer. So let's do this. So I said up here, plants, in plants, meiosis leads to production of spores, right? So look, here is a sex cell or an individual, but let's just say here's a diploid individual, which just means a grown-up, right? A grown-up capable of making sex cells. And on that grown-up, here is a sex cell that we took off, and that sex cell is going to go through meiosis to, now we're in the plants, to make spores. And those spores are going to grow into haploid individuals, what we call gametophytes. And those plants, those gametophytes, will make the egg and the sperm, which will ultimately fuse into a zygote and result in your sporophyte individual. So what this means, I know this is confusing, just stick with me. What this means though in the plant is that in plants, there's actually 2 phases or generations to complete a single life cycle. So let me say that again. In order to have a plant life cycle, that single plant will have to at one time be a gametophyte plant and then later be a sporophyte plant in its single life cycle. 2 phases, 2 generations. Yeah, I mean, like, that's really crazy. You and me don't do that. You don't exist as a haploid individual and then exist as a diploid individual. We always exist as just the one diploid individual. So this is very weird. And this weird thing, this shifting between these 2 phases or generations is what we call alternation of generation. Plant life cycle alternates between gametophyte plant and sporophyte plant. And then the next generation will have the same thing, gametophyte plant, sporophyte plant. Next generation, gametophyte plant, sporophyte plant. The generations are the gametophyte plant and the sporophyte plant. So that's what we call alternation of generations. All right, that might seem really weird to think about. Having more than one organism in a single life cycle, that sounds really weird. But believe it or not, you've probably encountered something like this before, in that most people know that a butterfly at some point was a caterpillar. Most people know that, right? If you didn't know that, sorry, spoiler alert. You can't have a butterfly unless you had a caterpillar, right? And in that more familiar example, what happens, right? A caterpillar hatches from an egg. The caterpillar eats leaves, grows bigger. Ultimately, the caterpillar goes into a pupa. And then what comes out of the pupa? A butterfly. Is the butterfly and the caterpillar the same individual genetically? Yes, this is the same individual, but it transforms. It goes through these 2 stages or phases for a single life cycle. So that you could be like, oh yeah, so in a similar way, plants will go through this too, but instead we're talking gametophyte plant and sporophyte plant. So although this butterfly example is nice because it kind of gives you a reference point of how you can have many organisms in a single life cycle, I should be clear that this is not exactly the same thing that happens in plants. The main reason it's not exactly the same thing that happens in plants is because, for what it's worth, this caterpillar is diploid. This butterfly is diploid. But in the plants, you're talking about the alternation of a haploid or 1N individual and a diploid individual. So it's not exactly the same thing, but it's a good reference point. All right, so we're going to talk more now about it in plants. So first, let's have a definition we can refer to, right? I think this is the one that comes from your book. So all plants, doesn't matter if you're a little moss or a giant tree or a little rose bush or a water lily, any plant, a banana, any plant that exists goes through this process of alternation of generations. What is it? It's the alternation between a haploid gametophyte plant and a diploid sporophyte plant or generation in the life cycle of sexually reproducing plants. And so these words, gametophyte plant and sporophyte plant, might seem a little scary. You never heard them before. And do I do it on the subsequent? Let me see if I go. Let me see if I do. I do. Haha, yay. You don't have to be scared of these big words if you break them down into what they mean. So sporophyte plant. So let's start with let's start with gametophyte plant, since I've been saying you go from gametophyte plant to sporophyte plant. So we'll start with gametophyte plant. The word gametophyte. So phyte means plant, and gameto means gametes. So a gametophyte plant is a plant that makes what? It makes gametes, egg and sperm. It's in the name, gametophyte, phyte, or a plant that makes gametes. If you're going to be making egg and sperm, which have to be haploid, remember when I showed you if like egg and sperm come together, they have to have half of the chromosome number as the adult individual in order to make the new individual. So if you're going to be a plant, or a phyte that makes gametes, you already have to be haploid. So the gametophyte plant is a haploid plant that will make haploid gametes, egg and sperm. Don't worry about this right now. Don't worry about that right now. But just gametophyte plant, haploid plant that makes egg and sperm. What about sporophyte plant? Well, phyte still means plant, so that's easy. But sporo refers to spores. So if you say the word sporophyte, you're talking about a phyte or a plant that makes what? It makes spores. It's in the name, sporophyte. And that sporophyte plant is a diploid plant, and that's going to make haploid spores via meiosis. So remember, we can go back even here, because I said it already, right? Oops. No. Oh, it's this, right? In plants, meiosis is makes spores, right? In plants, meiosis makes spores that are haploid, and those spores are going to grow into gametophyte plants. And that's what this is showing you here. I have a question. So do a lot of plant names have phyte at the end? We will come across that ending phyte other times in the course. Yeah. Yes, we will. Okay, so these are very important terms, and I will say that for the rest of the classes we have, we're going to see alternation of generations almost every class, and we're going to be using these words sporophyte plant and gametophyte plant almost all the rest of the class, today's class and all the other lectures that remain for the course. So when we finish today, I really want you to understand what I mean by sporophyte plant and gametophyte plant. All right. Okay, so If you are a plant that makes spores, you have to have an organ on your plant body that makes spores, right? And if you are a plant that makes gametes, egg, and sperm, you have to have organs on your plant that make egg and sperm. And so there are those things, and they have names. So the organ that makes spores that's on the Sporophyte plant is called a sporangium. The plural is sporangia. So every sporophyte plant will have many sporangia on it because sporangia are the organs that make spores. When you're talking about the gametophyte plant, the plant that makes gametes, egg, and sperm, they have to have organs on them that make egg and sperm, and they have names. So the organ that makes sperm is called an Antheridium. The plural is Antheridia. The organ that makes eggs is called an Archegonium. Plural, Archegonia. And as I said, these, just as we will see the word sporophyte plant and gametophyte plant in every other lecture we have for the course, we will see sporangium, antheridium, and archegonium in all of the rest of the course material as well. All right, so now you know plants do alternation of generations, and now you know what the two generations are, the gametophyte plant and the sporophyte plant. And you know that the sporophyte plant, right, sporophyte is the plant that makes spores, and you know that the gametophyte plant is the plant that makes gametes, egg, and sperm. And you know that the sporophyte plant has an organ on it that makes spores that is called a sporangium, and the gametophyte plants have organs on them that make egg and sperm, and that those organs are called Antheridia and Archegonia. Now let's look at this in an example plant, and we will use first we'll look at it. We're going to look at the actual alternation of generations as a schematic, and then we'll look at it in an actual plant. And what I will say is, when you got the slides for this class today, this alternation of generations overview is probably the thing you're going to want to print out and have next to you when you're studying and whatnot, because this is a very good way to organize alternation of generations. All right, so we'll start with the sporophyte plant. What does a sporophyte, I'll ask the class, what does a sporophyte plant make? I heard something. What's that, Sharonda? Spores? Yes. Sporophyte plant makes spores, correct. Yay. So we have a sporophyte plant. Sporophyte plant is diploid, or 2N, and we know the spores are haploid or 1N. So what process must occur on the sporophyte plant if we're going to get those, if we're going to go from a 2N thing to a 1N thing? Which of the two processes that we talked about today result in the thing having half the chromosomes? We had mitosis and we had meiosis.
Meiosis.
Yay, meiosis. Yes, great. Yay. Okay, great. Okay, so just getting you oriented here. So here's our sporophyte plant, right? And we know sporophyte plant makes spores. You guys just told me that. So that has to happen inside of an organ, and the organ is called a sporangium, which is also diploid. Inside of the sporangium are diploid cells that will ultimately, through meiosis, become spores, and we call them spore mother cells. These are going to be the cells that go through meiosis. So look, whoa, there you go. Those spore mother cells go through meiosis, and you end up with, remember, meiosis ends up with 4 things, 4 daughter cells. This word tetrad is just a fancy way to say 4. So meiosis occurs and you end up with 4 spores, right? Notice the color change. Notice the color change because we went from diploid, so bluish color, to haploid. So notice the color change on the schematic. All right. So meiosis occurred. We have spores now, 4 of them, but let's just talk about one. Let's just talk about one spore that's also obviously haploid. Well, I told you on the previous slides that the spore is going to grow into a plant that makes gametes. And so here we go. The spore is going to grow into a gametophyte plant, right? Or a plant that makes gametes, egg, and sperm. Notice the gametophyte plant is haploid, unlike the sporophyte plant, which is diploid, right? Because meiosis already occurred. The gametophyte plant is going to have on it gametes, the gametophyte plant is going to have on it organs that make the gametes. We just learned their names. Antheridium, which is going to make sperm. Archegonium, which is going to make egg. There you go. Notice that the Antheridium and the Archegonium are also haploid. And notice that the sperm and egg are also haploid, right? Or 1N. Eventually, via the process of fertilization, the sperm and the egg are going to come together. And when you have 1N sperm plus 1N egg, the result is N plus N is a 2N cell, 2N zygote cell. And so that now has that zygote cell is diploid because that zygote cell is going to be what grows into the new sporophyte individual. So notice the color change, right? Once sperm and egg come together, the product is a zygote, which is diploid. That zygote is going to grow into that embryo, young plant, which is also diploid, and eventually that embryo is going to grow into the sporophyte plant, right? So this is what I was saying. If you print out, or this is a great slide to have on hand as we move through the rest of the course, because it really breaks it down in a way that's easier to understand. Now, you might have heard me say the word grow several times, and I said at the top of the class that whereas meiosis here is used to make things haploid, the other process of cell division we talked about, which is mitosis, is used for growing. So in order for a sporophyte plant to have an organ on it, it needs to grow that organ, right? In order for the spore to grow, a spore is one cell. A gametophyte plant is a whole plant. So in order for that spore to turn into a gametophyte plant, it has to grow. And that gametophyte plant will have to grow organs, right? Grow. So anytime you hear me say the word grow, you should think mitosis. So whereas we talked about these, look, so sporophyte plant is going to grow an organ, you have to have mitosis to do that, because mitosis is for growth and repair, right? That inside of that organ, the sporangium, you're going to have cells that ultimately go through meiosis. Well, those cells are going to have to grow inside of that organ. Just like I said, if spore is going to grow into a gametophyte plant, you have to have mitosis. If that gametophyte plant is going to grow organs, they have to grow via mitosis, etc. And this is what it was saying on the previous slide where I said, don't worry about it, in that because the gametophyte plant is already haploid, when it makes egg and sperm, it makes it via mitosis because the reduction of chromosomes has already happened. But so I'm just showing you here that in the background, there's all these processes of mitosis occurring, right? The zygote cell is a single cell. An embryo is multiple cells. So that involves growth. An embryo is super small. A mature sporophyte plant is really big. In order to do that, you have to grow via mitosis. Okay. This was it in kind of a visual diagram. Let's talk about it in a real plant. So here we go. This is a fern plant. And just so you're oriented when you're looking at this later, So here, this is where we started, which is Sporophyte Plant. When we went through this whole thing, right? We started at Sporophyte Plant. We're going to start on Sporophyte Plant here as well, but I just want you to know that it starts up here. This is our Sporophyte Plant. So we're starting there. There you go. See? Sporophyte Plant. So this fern plant, fern life cycle is a good way to learn alternation of generations because you can clearly see with your eye, with the naked eye, both the Sporophyte generation and the Gametophyte generation. In other plants, sometimes it's hard to see the Gametophyte. So that's why we use ferns to get you introduced to this concept. So here's our Sporophyte plant on the top. It's diploid. We know that that Sporophyte plant has to grow spores, and we know, or has to make spores. So we know on that Sporophyte plant there has to be organs that make spores. And there you go. That is a close-up of a Fern Sporangium. So inside of that Fern Sporangium, and notice the colors, right? I still use the same color scheme of blue for diploid and orangey for haploid. So inside that sporangium are those spore mother cells that are diploid, and those are going to undergo the process of meiosis, which the job of meiosis is to take that diploid mother cell and create 4 haploid spores. And now we'll talk about one of those spores. So here's one. That's what these little guys are. So like here is one spore. And notice the color change, right? Because a spore is haploid, already went through meiosis. So that spore is going to grow via mitosis into the Gametophyte plant. That Gametophyte plant will continue to grow. In the ferns, the Gametophyte plant a lot of times looks like a little green heart, which is like here. And we know that Gametophyte plant is going to make gametes, egg, and sperm. So we know that Gametophyte plant has to have organs on it that make egg and sperm. And here they are. So if I go here, use black. So on this fern Gametophyte plant, here is a bunch of Archegonia, which is the plural. Here's a close-up of one Archegonium, which is the singular. And at the bottom of this fern Gametophyte plant down here, there's a bunch of Antheridia. Here's a close-up of one Antheridium, which is the singular. The Archegonium is going to have an egg inside. There it is. The Antheridium is going to make sperm that will swim out. Here is one swimming away. Eventually, the sperm will fuse with an egg. That's what's showing you here. And once you have 1 N sperm plus 1 N egg, N plus N, 2 N zygote cell, right? 2 N zygote cell. Notice the color change. Also notice that, and I'll say this a bunch of times as we go forward, but egg stays. Sperm swims away, egg stays. Where was egg? Egg was inside of this organ called an archegonium, right? Where was sperm? Sperm was an antheridium, but sperm swims away. So when sperm swims away to join the egg, remember, egg stays, egg stays. Egg's going to stay inside. Egg's going to stay inside of the archegonium. And that means that when egg and sperm unite, that diploid zygote is ultimately starting off in the archegonium as well, right? Because egg stays. Egg stays. I'm just pointing that out, that this is still this structure here is still an Archegonium, right? Because that's where the egg was, and egg stays. I see a question in the chat box, but I'm just going to go real quick here. So, and then ultimately this embryo, the zygote will grow into an embryo rather. Just to use the same colors, I'll use blue here. So actually I'll draw the Gametophyte plant first. So remember the little heart-shaped green thing, right? So this is that Gametophyte plant right here. And the new Sporophyte plant is growing out of it, right? Because egg and sperm fuse. So here's the new, this is a young embryonic plant emerging. Here's its root. And eventually that plant will grow into that Sporophyte plant on the top. All right, question in the chat box. Plants reproduce like humans. Well, yeah, I mean, they have eggs and they have sperm, right? So, an egg stays. Egg stays. In most cases in biology, egg stays. There's some examples in fish, for example, that fish release their eggs into the water and fish release their sperm into the water. So there are those examples. But in general, egg usually stays and sperm usually comes to find the egg. All right. Yeah, and just so when you're looking at the slides later, I color coded it for you to see the Sporophyte, the baby Sporophyte plant and the Gametophyte plant. Okay, so as you can see, even though the butterfly caterpillar example is a good way to kind of get your brain wrapping around this 2 organisms for one life cycle thing, it's definitely not the same thing, right? It's totally not the same thing. So if I ask you if it's the same thing and you say yes, no, it's not the same thing. It's just a good way to get your head primed to kind of think about it. All right. There are lots of plants, right? We learned a lot. In the beginning classes, we learned about how many plants there are, right? There's like close to 400,000 species of plants known. And we're going to talk about some of those plants for the rest of the course. And that's why it's important to know about alternation of generations, because in the rest of the course, when we start to talk about these other plants, like mosses, liverworts, hornworts, conifers, ferns, all these other ones, we're going to learn about how they do alternation of generations in those different plants. Before we go into the details of that, though, I'll just let you know that over evolutionary time, we see a switch in which of the generations is dominant. So in some plants, here we go. In the more primitive, when I use the word primitive, I mean in terms of evolutionary history. So like earlier, less complex, I guess, is the way. But so in those more primitive or earlier plants, it's the Gametophyte generation that's dominant. For example, the plants we're going to talk about today, mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, they have the Gametophyte generation as dominant. So if you want to use the caterpillar butterfly analogy, you could say that in the mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, they exist as the caterpillar most of the time, and then occasionally a little butterfly. Whereas in the later or higher evolved plants, it's the Sporophyte generation that's dominant. And this pertains to all of your vascular plants. So most of the plants that you are familiar with, ferns, trees, flowering plants, conifer trees, all the plants that, if you're sitting right now in a room that there's a plant in it, I guarantee you, if you look at that plant, you're looking at the Sporophyte plant. Unless, of course, you have a moss, which most people do not have. All right, but we'll cover this more. I'm just getting you comfortable with the idea that it depends on what plant you're talking about which generation is dominant. All right, so here are some examples, visual examples of what I'm talking about. So this is phyla. Phyla, remember from the first class, when biological taxonomy, right? Phyla, here, right? Maybe you remember this, right? Phylum, but the plural is phyla. This is back when we were learning about biological taxonomy, right? We also learned like genus is the singular, whereas the plural is genera, right? That's what it says up here, phyla, where the gametophyte is dominant. So one example is mosses. So if you've ever walked in a forest or even in a city street, shady city street where there's a lot of shade from buildings and seen mosses, what you're looking at with your naked eye, all this green fluffy stuff. What's a good color on this slide? White. All this green fluffy stuff, which is mosses, is the Gametophyte generation. This is the Gametophyte generation. The Sporophyte generation in the mosses is very small, very obscure. Question, wait, how do mosses attain water compared to regular plants with leaves and stomata? Does moss have stomata? So moss does not have stomata. We will learn later in this class how mosses get water and air. But yeah, you're asking that because it said here that mosses are an example of a non-vascular plant. So they don't have xylem and phloem, right? They use other processes that we'll learn about today. So here's what mosses look like. And like I said, white's not a good color on this slide. Let's use pink. Oh no, I use the real colors that I use to. So when you look at a green fluffy of moss, you're looking at the Gametophyte plant. The Sporophyte plants in moss are actually these usually weird stick-like things coming out, and they're attached to the green fluffy. We'll learn about that more later today. But it's that green fluffy that's dominant. So Gametophyte is dominant in the mosses. Once you get to the ferns, though, we start to have a transition in that where the Sporophyte is dominant. So this is a real life slide. Remember I said that green heart? Oops, wrong color. Remember I said the green heart, right? Gametophyte plant and fern. So here's that green heart. Once the egg that's inside of the organs that hold eggs, the Archegonia, is fertilized, right? So here you still have the Gametophyte plant. And the Sporophyte plant is now going to emerge out of that. And eventually in the ferns, the Gametophyte plant will just go away. And when you ultimately end up with this kind of scenario, and you see the Sporophyte plant. So Gametophyte plant is still around, but it's really, and here's the Sporophyte plant emerging. Here's its root. But when you think of a fern, you think of this kind of thing. And so in the ferns, the Sporophyte plant is dominant. Just so you know, when I'm drawing on this thing, that's the same, oops, that's the same thing as this thing. Just to get you oriented. Okay. Yeah, so in the mosses and the liverworts and hornworts, the Gametophyte's dominant. When you get to the ferns, now we have a Sporophyte dominant. And then later, when you're talking about flowering plants and all the plants you're probably familiar with, you're looking at Sporophyte plant being dominant. And the Gametophyte plant is actually really highly reduced, oops, and hard to see. All right, any questions about that? Alternation of generations. Any questions about meiosis versus mitosis? Any questions about, yeah, any of those things? If you have them, feel free to email me or write them in the discussion board or write them now. If there aren't, we're going to go forward. All right, so now we know a bit about alternation of generations, Sporophyte plant, Gametophyte plant, the organs on them, process of meiosis, the process of mitosis. Now we have all that information. Now let's start to get to know plants. real plants, real life plants. And in today's class, we're going to cover the non-vascular plants. All right. This is my roadmap of the plant kingdom. So remember in that biological taxonomy, right? We talked about the different kingdoms. You and me, we're in the animal kingdom, right? Plants are in the plant kingdom. And there are a bunch of divisions inside of the plant kingdom. The biggest division is probably this: non-vascular plants and vascular plants. Today, so non-vascular plants includes mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, and that's who we're going to talk about today. But just so you know, for next class, we're going to talk about spore plants. So just so I should say focused. In the plant kingdom, there's major divisions. One major division is that there's vascular plants and non-vascular plants. Once you're in the vascular plants, another major division is you have plants that shed seeds and plants that shed spores. Once you're in the seed plants, you have seed plants that make flowers and seed plants that do not. We will talk about those. So this is basically what we will discuss for the rest of the course, are these plants. All right, so today, non-vascular plants. So non-vascular plants are also called bryophytes. Bryophytes. And Sharonda, I think it was Sharonda, was asking, are there other, does the word phyte show up a lot in talking about plants? And the answer is yes. And so phyte here still means plant, just like gametophyte and sporophyte, right? Still means plants. But the word bryo comes from the Greek, which means moss. So when they were named, it was basically the moss plants. But then later, it was discovered that they weren't all mosses. There were also liverworts and hornworts, but the name bryophyte sticks. Yeah. So so when you see the word bryophyte, you should think to yourself non-vascular plants. That's the same thing. Bryophytes, non-vascular plants, same thing. Here's what they look like. You have moss, liverwort, and hornwort. And there's about to be some scary words coming up. Fair warning, which are the phylum names of these. For what it's worth on any exam or anything like that. For example, here, hornworts are in the phylum Anthocerophyta. On an exam, you should know, so there's not that many of these. There's not that many of these phylum names. So you should do well to try to remember them. But just so you know, so anytime you see, let me back up. Whereas phytes means plant, right? Non-vascular plants. All phylum names end in the ending phyta. And so hornworts, we'll talk about them later. But so hornworts are in the phylum Anthocerophyta. Liverworts are in the phylum Marcantiophyta. I think your book says this, but we'll go with Marcantiophyta. And then mosses are in the phylum Bryophyta. So one thing I want to point out here, don't get this word confused with this word. The way not to get confused is to remember that phytes, like gametophyte, sporophyte means plants, whereas phyta means you're talking about a phylum. So mosses are in the phylum Bryophyta, or the phylum of the mosses, and we're going to learn about these guys today. So as I said, in case for when you're looking at the slides, that the word bryon is Greek for moss, hence why mosses are in the phylum Bryophyta. And the one main thing about these non-vascular plants is that they need water for the sperm to swim. So the sperm actually do swim. They really, really do. It's another example of when people say, like, plants don't move. Well, they have, some of them have swimming sperm, so I don't know about that. But yeah, so they need water so all of these, moss, liverwort, and hornwort, need water for the sperm to swim. But as you may have guessed, because of the word non-vascular plants, right? Non-vascular plants, the biggest characteristic of mosses, liverworts, and hornworts is that they don't have xylem and phloem. They are non-vascular. Other things about them is they are what's considered pioneer plants. So they are like the first to show up on a newly exposed habitat. So for example, if there's a landslide or a volcanic eruption, or if there's a new island that forms via volcanic activity and you have a brand new or recently cleared area, mosses, liverworts, and hornworts are the guys who usually show up first. But they're also really diverse in where they can live. They can live in moist places and temperate forests. And some of them are even very adapted to living in extreme environments. So some of them can live in deserts or in the Arctic, at the tops of mountains, and as plants that grow on other plants, or epiphytes, which I think we came across before. Okay, lots of words, right? So let's just like look at some pictures of some moss growing. Okay, yay. So look on this rock, for example. I'll use white. Look at this rock. This rock is covered with green fluffy stuff. That green fluffy stuff is moss. Look at this tree covered in green fluffy stuff. That green fluffy stuff is moss. Maybe some liverworts and hornworts too in there. Look, that's nice. See, all that green stuff, that's moss, and maybe liverworts and hornworts too. And remember, in the mosses, liverworts and hornworts, the Gametophyte generation is dominant. So when you see green fluffy, you're looking at the Gametophyte generation. Are algae also non-vascular? So there's lots of different types of algae, and it depends. If you're talking about like a one-celled type of algae, like a cyanobacteria, I'll write it in the thing. I guess that's really a bacteria though. Algae is kind of used to describe lots of different things. So some algae can be considered, I'm going to say no. It depends. It depends. If you're talking about single-celled algae, then yes, they're non-vascular. But there's some stuff that people call algae that's like a flowering plant. So in that case, it's vascular. So it depends on the species you're talking about. So anyways, yeah, so here, more green fluffy stuff. This is moss. Look at all this green fluffy moss with leaves on top of it, right, from the trees. Here's the close-up. These are actually a type of liverwort here. All this green fluffy. Here we got kind of a mixed bag of different things. We have like, there's some, this is all moss. This flat stuff here, those are liverworts. But basically kind of like green, small green plants, right? Small green plants, kind of looks maybe like a seaweed or an algae, depending on what you're thinking about, right? Right here, this is all liverworts here. Basically small green things that you wouldn't really even look at unless you were looking at the ground. This is an example of it living in kind of an extreme environment, right? So this is moss growing in a snowy condition. All right. So for all of the non-vascular plants, this is not just mosses. I'll use black. No, I'll use pink. For all of the bryophytes, for all of the non-vascular plants, these things are true. The dominant generation is Gametophyte generation, and the Sporophyte plant is never free living. The Sporophyte plant always remains attached to the Gametophyte plant for the mosses, for the liverworts, and for the hornworts. And if you're talking about the Gametophyte of mosses or liverworts or hornworts, these are some of their characteristics. So they're always larger than the Sporophyte plant. The Gametophyte of these is always photosynthetic. They're the long-lived generation. The Gametophyte is totally independent of the Sporophyte plant. So the Gametophyte plant does not need the Sporophyte. Once you have a spore, that can grow into a gametophyte plant. Gametophyte plant is photosynthetic. It can make its own food. It can get its own water. It is independent of the sporophyte plant. Whereas the sporophyte plant is completely dependent and has to get all of its water and all of its food from the gametophyte plant. But gametophyte plant is independent, and most importantly, the gametophyte plant is haploid. The gametophyte plant is haploid. The gametophyte plant is haploid, or 1N. What does the gametophyte plant do? We already learned this today, right? The gametophyte plant is going to make egg and sperm, gametes, egg and sperm. The eggs are going to be in the female sex organs, which are Archegonia. There's going to be one egg in each Archegonium. And the sperm is going to be made in the male sex organs, or the Antheridia. This is what we already covered today. This just in case you came in late or you're having trouble keeping up with all these new things today. Just here's a little recall. All right. Are the Archegonia and the Antheridia the same as stigma and style in flowers? No, they are not. Flowers have Archegonia and Antheridia, but they are parts of the flower, and they are not the stigma and the style. But we will learn about Archegonia and Antheridia in flowers later. But good way to kind of be thinking about sexual reproduction in plants, right? All right. Here is an example of what Archegonia could look like in the non-vascular plants. So what is the Archegonium? The Archegonium is the female sex organ. It's haploid, and it consists of these different parts. It consists of a very short stalk, so here, this is one. Is pink showing up okay on this slide? Yes, no, maybe so? Yeah, okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I circled here one Archegonium. Here is many Archegonia, right? And so each Archegonium will have a short stalk, which is located right here. That just serves to connect it to the gametophyte plant. Each Archegonium will also have a venter, which is the swollen part. That's this. If you were to be looking at the Archegonium next to it, it's this swollen part. And the venter is where the egg cell is going to be located. The egg cell is here. And in this one, it's over here, if you're looking at that one. And a long, narrow neck. And so that's this. Here's the long, narrow neck of an Archegonium. And in the middle of the neck are these special cells that are called neck canal cells. And those neck canal cells will break down when the egg is ready, and that will allow sperm to swim down the neck and reach the egg. Which one is the Archegonium? Is this. So this is one Archegonium. This is one Archegonium. And there are a few here that are starting to grow, but they haven't finished yet. And each one of them will have these things: a short stalk, a swollen venter with an egg inside, and then a long, narrow neck. Yep, no problem. All right, so here is an Antheridium. This is the male sex organ, also haploid. And it's also going to consist of some different areas. So like the Archegonium, it has a short stalk that attaches it to the gametophyte plant. It will have a covering of sterile cells. So that's this sterile jacket layer. That just means that those are cells that don't do anything with sperm. They're not going to make sperm. They just serve to protect what's inside of the Antheridium. That's why we say sterile jacket, sterile cell. And then inside are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of sperm producing cells. So all this stuff inside is sperm producing cells. You might see this scary word, spermatogenous. Do I break that down? I do. Ha! I know me so well. So remember, cells are cells, and if you have lots of those cells together, that's a tissue. So there's lots of sperm producing cells. They're all located in here. But if you have lots of sperm producing cells, you could say you have spermatogenous tissue. And just so you're not scared of this word, so sperma means sperm, and genus means like comes from, like the genesis of it. And so these are cells in here, are cells that are going to generate sperm, right? Sperm producing cells. Spermatogenous, tissue that is going to generate sperm. And all of the things here, the stalk, the sterile cover of cells, and the sperm producing cells are all haploid, because we're on the gametophyte plant. These are just like, these are examples of what it could look like when you're talking about the non-vascular plants. We're not talking specifically here about moss or liverwort or hornwort. We're just showing you what the organs can look like. Same with this. Whether you're a moss or liverwort or hornwort, your Antheridia is going to make sperm. And the sperm is going to need water to reach the egg. So that's why they tend to grow along like a river or in a very wet location, because they require sperm. They require water for the sperm to swim to the egg. For those examples I said that like live in the desert or live in like the top of a mountain, the plant might be able to live there, might be able to live in the desert just fine, but it will need water eventually for the sperm to swim to the egg. And the sperm, like I said, they legit do swim. So they have flagella, they have little tails that flap and allow them to swim. Once the sperm, which is haploid, and the egg, which is haploid, unite, then you have the beginning of the sporophyte plant, right? Which is diploid, the diploid zygote. Okay, right? That's what I just said. Okay. So we had sperm and egg come together. And like I said before, remember, egg stays. So egg was here, sperm met it, but now because sperm and egg fused into that 2N zygote, now we're going to have this zygote grow into an embryo. But the reason I'm pointing this out is because notice the embryo is still growing inside of the archegonium where the egg was, right? Here's the short stalk of the archegonium. Here's the venter, or the swollen part of the archegonium. And here's the neck of the archegonium, because egg stays, right? So egg stays, so the embryo will be growing where the egg was. Okay. So here we have it. The 2N zygote has now grown into an embryo. That embryo is going to keep growing. And when you hear grow, you think mitosis, right? Keep growing into a mature sporophyte plant. This is an example of what a sporophyte plant could look like in the non-vascular plants. And they have things such as a foot, which attaches it to the gametophyte plant. It'll have a little stalk that's called a seta, and a capsule, which is the sporangium, right? Because sporophyte plants have to make what? Spores. And they use the organ, the sporangium, to grow those spores, or to make those spores, right? Here's a recall from about that term. This is the things I was just mentioning. So the foot anchors it to the gametophyte plant. This is where the sporophyte plant is going to get its nutrients, right? So the gametophyte plant, I'll use so this all here is gametophyte plant in orange. This all here is Sporophyte plant in blue. It's attached at the foot, and the foot is where it's going to get all the water and mineral nutrients from the gametophyte plant, because the sporophyte plant is completely dependent on the gametophyte plant in the non-vascular plants. The seta is the long stalk that holds the sporangium up, aka capsule. And the capsule, aka sporangium, is where the spore mother cells are. And importantly, remember, right, this whole sporophyte plant was the result from egg and sperm coming together. So sporophyte plant is always going to be diploid, right? Every part of the sporophyte plant is going to be diploid as well. So in that capsule, aka sporangium, are those diploid mother cells that we talked about at the beginning of the class. And those are going to be what undergoes meiosis to make spores, and then ultimately spores that will grow into the gametophyte plant. Okay. Let's just get to know the mosses a little bit. So that was an overview of non-vascular plants and the process of alternation of generations in all of the non-vascular plants. Now let's talk specifically about these plants, the mosses, liverworts, and hornwort. So mosses are in the phylum Bryophyta. How do the gametophyte get their resources again? So the gametophytes in the non-vascular plants are photosynthetic. So the gametophyte plants can take the sun and carbon dioxide and make sugars by themselves. And the gametophyte plants will actually just absorb water through their body. They're non-vascular, so they don't have vascular tissue. So they'll just absorb water via the processes of osmosis. Yeah. You could think of like a moss gametophyte plant as kind of like a green piece of paper towel. Because it's green, it could use the sun to make its own food. But if you put the paper towel near water, it just kind of like soaks it up, right? It doesn't have any like special tubes or anything. All right, so mosses. Mosses are in the phylum Bryophyta. Even on this little drawing, we could easily see the gametophyte and sporophyte. The green fluffy is the gametophyte. Weird stick things are the sporophyte plants. Notice the weird stick things are all connected to the green fluffy because they are dependent on the gametophyte plant. There's three major groups of mosses. True moss is the one that is the most common and that you've probably seen. There's also peat mosses and granite mosses. In this class, I think we'll just talk briefly about the true mosses and the peat mosses. So here are some examples of true mosses. And the reason they're called true, I don't know why. I think it's also a vestige of like old inscription. But I always say like, okay, they're called true mosses because they're like the most common. So here's two example genera of true mosses. And we're only going to learn these two, even though there's thousands and thousands of species, right? We'll learn these two. There's Polytricum, which is on the left, pronounced Pelletricum. And then there's Niam on the right, which is pronounced like Bill Nye, Niam. I know, silent M. Thanks, botany. Silent M. Okay. So Pelletricum and Niam. This is where you might see them growing. You might see them growing on the sides of a tree, like in this picture. You might see them growing on a rock, right? So here on the tree picture and this rock picture, we see green fluffy. So which generation are we seeing in the tree picture and in this? Which generation is, I'll use white. Which generation is this, the green fluffy? There's two generations that we've learned about today. There's the Gametophyte generation and the Sporophyte generation. So which of those is this green fluffy? Yay. Gametophyte, yes, which is the dominant generation in the mosses, correct? All right. But on this slide, we're starting to see the sporophyte plant emerging out. So each of these little stick things, here's one. Each of these little stick things is a sporophyte plant. Look, here you go. This is a nice picture because you can see the green fluffy and the sporophyte plants coming out. All right. We're going to go through this kind of quickly to just look at alternation of generations in mosses, in the true mosses. We've already come across most of these terms today. And so I'm just going to go through these slides so you have them and understand them when you're looking at them by yourself later. So start here. Start with the mature sporophyte plants. Sorry, start here with the gametophyte plant. So in this case, we have a male and female gametophyte plant. I should use the other color. Right. Here is one gametophyte plant. Here's another gametophyte plant, right? Notice they're both, so these are your green fluffies, right? These are these green fluffies, right? Both of them, gametophyte plants, they're haploid. They're both going to have sex organs on them because they need to make gametes, right? That's why they're called gametophyte. Female gametophyte plant's going to have sex organs at the top. Male gametophyte plant's going to have sex organs at the top. And they need water for the sperm to swim. So this is usually when I make my like Migos joke, because you have like a raindrop dropped on top. Raindrop drop on top of the male gametophyte plant. Here you go. So we're going to look closely here. And we go closely here. That's what we're looking at. And the raindrop has dropped on top of that male gametophyte plant, and all the Antheridia are up there. So here's an Antheridium. Here's an Antheridium. Those are going to be what makes the sperm. The sperm is already made. The raindrop is going to splash the sperm. So the raindrop is going to splash the sperm on top of the female gametophyte plant. Female gametophyte plant, so if we look here, here's the top of her. Here's the top, close up. Female gametophyte plant is going to have a bunch of Archegonia on it. Here's one Archegonium, right? When you look for the Archegonium, look for the eggs and also look for the swollen venter. But it'll take some time to get used to that. The water from the raindrop lets the sperm splash and swim, 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 swim down. Oops, too far. Swim, swim, swim down to meet the egg. Here is a close, so here you go. Here's a sperm that's swimming. Here's it, believe it or not, this is a close-up of a moss sperm. Yeah. But the moss sperm is going to swim, 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 swim down, meet the egg. One end sperm, one end egg, and you should be able to guess what's going to happen next. Oh yeah, it's just so you know where you're looking when you're looking at the slides, right? So this is a drawing, but we can also look at it under the microscope slide. So this is a microscope slide showing you many Archegonia, all of which have an egg. So here's one Archegonium. Here's the egg inside. Sorry, here's the egg inside. If you want to like review those parts that we just learned, right? So like on this Archegonium, here's the stalk that attaches it to the top of the gametophyte plant. Here's that venter. Here is the neck. And inside the venter is the egg. You can see the egg there. Okay. Likewise, you can look at the male organs under the microscope. So here's Antheridia. Same things that so here's the stalk of an Antheridia. Here I'm drawing the sterile jacket of cells. And then all this dot stuff is the sperm producing cells. So this is 3 Antheridia, right? Okay, so where we left off was sperm and egg were coming together. And what do you know, right? You probably guessed it already, but then I need to change colors to blue. Sperm and egg come together, right? Here's the sperm, egg via the process of fertilization, and then whammo, now you're a sporophyte, now you're diploid zygote. Where is the diploid zygote? Right? It's where the egg was. Here's where the egg was. So the diploid zygote is still inside of that archegonium because egg stays. Diploid zygote is a single-celled thing. It's going to grow via mitosis into an embryo, which is still where the egg was, still where the egg was, right? In the archegonium. And that diploid embryo is going to grow via mitosis into the young sporophyte plant. Here we see the young sporophyte plant emerging. Remember, they look like stick things in the mosses. Notice the young sporophyte plant is attached to the gametophyte plant, right? Because egg stays and that's where it grows. Here you go. So here now, this is the green fluffy is the gametophyte. Sporophyte plant has gotten mature. So there's its, this I'm drawing is the sporophyte plant. The parts of the sporophyte plant, you have the foot that attaches it to the gametophyte plant. You have the seta, which is the stalk that holds up the sporangium or capsule. Remember, the sporangium is going to make what? Spores, right? It's going to make spores. Here is a close-up of a sporangia. So the thing I just circled is one of these. Close up. And likewise, since the job of a sporangium is to make spores, you're going to have spore producing or spore generating tissue inside of that capsule. And eventually the spores are going to get released. So that's how it works in the true mosses. In the peat mosses, it's pretty similar. The alternation of generation is pretty much the same. There's only one little difference, but so all the peat mosses you'll ever meet are in this same genus. There's only one genus of peat moss, which is sphagnum. Here's the difference. So the alternation of generations that we just went through, right? Parts of the Archegonium, parts of the Antheridium, all that stuff, that's all the same for the peat mosses. The only difference, though, is that there's this other little structure instead of a seta. Maybe I just said even the word seta, but yeah, they don't have a seta in the peat mosses. They have a thing that's called pseudopodium, and I'll show you what it looks like. But the pseudopodium is actually part of the gametophyte plant. I'll show you what it looks like. Pseudo means false, and podium refers to foot. So it's kind of like saying false foot. It should actually be false seta. They should have named it pseudoseta because it's really more of a false seta. But just remember that so I'll show you why I'm making a big deal of this on the next here. So look, this is the top. I'll use orange still. So look, here is the fluffy, green fluffy, right? Green fluffy gametophyte plant. And here is the capsule or sporangium of a sporophyte plant. Now in the true mosses, the sporophyte plant had a stalk and then a seta. It had a stalk or a seta and the foot. But in the peat mosses, they have a pseudopodium. So this stalk is actually part of the gametophyte plant. And so the sporophyte plant of a peat moss just has a foot that attaches right there, and then the capsule. So that's this structure here in the peat mosses is that pseudopodium. And that's what I was talking about on this here. Okay, good. let's get through. So mosses, so the rest should go rather be more familiar because we're going to talk about the same players, and we won't focus on as much stuff. I think we'll get through rather quickly. So we just talked about mosses, which are in the phylum Bryophyta, and there's true mosses and peat mosses, right? Now we'll talk about liverworts. Liverworts are called liverworts because they kind of look like the shape of a liver, or whoever, so here's a gametophyte plant, kind of looks like a liver. Whoever named it thought it looked like a liver. And the word wort just means plant in the old Anglo-Saxon. So it's basically like the liver plant because it's shaped like a liver. Here's what they look like. They are in the phylum Marcantiophyta. Marcantiophyta, that's how you pronounce that. And liverworts, they, like I said, they're kind of shaped like a liver, but they're kind of flat. Like whereas the mosses are green, fluffy, the liverworts are kind of like flat. So in this picture, see these kind of like green ribbons, like here's a green ribbon, here's a green ribbon, here's a green ribbon. Those are the liverworts. They look kind of like green and flat. So they're in the phylum Marcantiophyta. Notice, as I said before, when you see this ending phyta, you know you're in a phylum Marcantiophyta. And just in case you are being very meticulous here, green ribbony things here are liverworts. The green fluffy things here are actually the sphagnum moss or the peat mosses that we just saw here. So you're not confused. So you're not thinking like this is a liverwort. You're like, well, that looks just like a peat moss. Yeah, that is a peat moss. The liverworts are the green ribbony things. So here's some examples of liverworts. Most of them have this thalloid or flat green shape and almost kind of look like a seaweed or a lichen. There are some types of liverworts that have more of a leafy appearance. Where do liverworts grow? Similar places that the mosses grow. They grow on rocks, they grow on places that are newly exposed environments. So like I said before, if there's a landslide or volcanic eruption, these will be the plants that first show up. They can grow literally on rocks, so they don't even need soil to be there. They can grow in soil, but they don't need it. They can grow on other plants as epiphytes, just like the mosses. So these are liverworts here. These are leafy liverworts. Here's an example of a flat type or thalloid shaped liverwort growing on another plant as an epiphyte. Some liverworts are aquatic, meaning that they live in water. So they either float in the water or they live completely submerged as a plant. In fact, if any of you have a freshwater fish tank and you have real live plants in that fish tank, there's a good chance that some of those plants are actually liverworts, believe it or not, because they're very popular in the freshwater fish hobby. But you don't have to go to like a faraway place. You don't have to go to like the Amazon or some, really far away place to see liverworts. You could actually see them if you look close enough, even in your area. So I took this picture, and this was actually the very first time I ever saw liverworts in real life. So I had seen them at botanical gardens. I had seen them in the lab, but I had never just been walking around and seen liverwort plants. And this occurred, it was the first time I ever saw it. And wouldn't you know, I'm in Newark, New Jersey. So this was taken right next to the building that's across from the law school. I can't even remember what it's called now. But yeah, right there, right under a rain gutter. So look down, you might be able to see liverworts even in the city. Liverworts are really small. I always say this to my students, especially nowadays. So like this thing here is a dime. Maybe for you guys, it doesn't matter as much because, but like sometimes my students are really young and so they don't even use cash anymore. And I have to be like, buy it, just so you know, this is a dime. But yeah, super small, smaller than a dime. It's like, I still use cash. I still use change. Yeah, so super small. And they are non-vascular plants. So just like the mosses, liverworts don't have any vascular tissue, no xylem and no phloem. Where are the sex organs located on liverworts? So if you are a flat liverwort, which is the ones we focus on in this class, they're going to grow on the dorsal side or the top side of the flat surface. So maybe you've heard of the term like dorsal fin, like of a shark. Like, oh yeah, my dorsal fin, it's on the top. And so the sex organs are going to be showing up here. But liverworts have special structures that actually elevate the sex organs, and we'll learn about them right now. There's two types. There is one that holds the male sex organs, and that's called an Antheridiophore. And then there's one structure that holds the female sex organs, and that's called an Archegoniophore. The word for, I think I even say it. Yeah, means the bearer of, the bearer of. So I'll use orange. So the Antheridiophore, so it's a structure that bears Antheridia. And so here is the Antheridiophore. I'm kind of coloring on it. And the Antheridia will be up here on the top. Whereas the Archegoniophore is a structure that bears Archegonia, and they kind of look like little palm trees. These little like weird arm things coming out. And the Archegonia will be on those little weird arm things. So this is different. In the mosses, we didn't have any special structure that had the sex organs on it. On the mosses, they were just at the top of the green fluffy. But on the liverworts are flat. So these new structures help to elevate the sex organs away and have them be a little bit higher. This is an old drawing here. This is another old drawing to show you kind of close up. So this, we'll start with the Antheridiophore. So if you go, if you go back to here, right, and even get rid of these circles. So if you were to look close up at the top of an Antheridiophore, it would look like this. And the Antheridia are all going to be located on the top surface. So like here's one Antheridium. Whereas if you were to look, okay. Whereas if you were going to look at the top of an Archegoniophore, it would look like this. Remember I said it has a little weird arm things? And so the Archegonia are going to hang down underneath the arms, kind of like little bats. No worries, Crystal. I figured something like that. Okay, so those are drawings. Here's what they look like in real life. So these are Antheridiophores. To me, the Antheridiophores kind of look like little umbrellas. So each of these, I'll circle one. So here's one Antheridiophore. Here's another Antheridiophore. Kind of look like little umbrellas. Whereas the, oh, and so here's a close-up of them, showing you the same things I showed you before on the previous, but like, so here, if we were to look at like one Antheridium, it would look like this up close. Same tissues, same structures we saw before, right? Little stalk, sterile jacket, and then sperm producing tissue all inside. But they're all located on these new umbrellas. So they're all up here on these little umbrellas called Antheridiophores. Whereas the Archegoniophores, they kind of look like little palm trees or octopus. They have these weird arms. So I was drawing on the previous. So here's the arm, right? Like if you were, here's an arm on the actual thing. And underneath the arms is where the Archegonia are going to occur. Here's one Archegonium. And it has the same parts that we saw before. Little stalk, swollen venter, and neck. Here is an egg inside. And this slide's actually cool because you actually see a sperm arriving to meet the egg. My head might be blocking some of that, but you'll have the slides when you look at these later. Okay. We're going to go through this. So this is just to give you kind of a basis of, it's similar. It's very similar to what we just saw in the mosses. There's just a few little tweaks, mostly because we're dealing with these Archegoniophores and Antheridiophores, right? So this is an overview of alternation of generations in the liverworts. So we're kind of all on the same page. So look, here's this. So I guess I should. Here's a female gametophyte. Here's a male gametophyte, right? They look kind of like flat green things, flat ribbony things. On the female gametophyte, you're going to have structures that have Archegonia on them, called Archegoniophores, that look like palm trees. On the male gametophyte plant, you're going to have structures that have Antheridia on them, or bare Antheridia, that look like little umbrellas. Little umbrella, raindrops are going to drop on top of the little umbrella. And if you were to look up close at that, that's what this is showing you. On the top of that little umbrella, which is called an Antheridiophore, are all of the Antheridia. Here's one, etc. They make sperm. The raindrop is going to drop on top of that Antheridiophore. The water is going to splash the sperm out of each Antheridium. And the water is going to splash the sperm on top of an Archegoniophore, which has all the female. So if we're going to look closely up at this Archegoniophore, here's what it looks like up close. So here comes a sperm, lands via the water onto the top, and the sperm's going to swim, 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 swim. And ultimately the sperm is going to reach an egg that's in one of these Archegonia. Okay. Here you go. Sperm, swim, swim, swim. Swim, 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 swim. So it can meet an egg inside of one of the Archegonia. And here it is. Look, sperm. Swim, 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 swim. Reaches the egg. 1N egg plus 1N sperm equals 2N zygote. So egg and sperm fuse via fertilization. Make your 2N zygote. This should start to be feeling a little more familiar now because we've kind of gone through it a few times. 2N zygote is, remember, 2N zygote is the beginning of the Sporophyte plant. Sporophyte plant is going to grow. So the 2N zygote is going to grow into the embryo. The embryo is going to grow and grow into the Sporophyte plant. because we're talking about liverworts, remember, where were the Archegonia? Oh, the wrong color. They hang upside down like a bat. Look, upside down like a bat. When we were looking at the mosses, it was like this, right? With the egg in here. And then the sporophyte plant would, once the egg was fertilized, the sporophyte plant would grow out, right? But in the liverworts, look, hangs upside down like a bat off of these things. So here it is hanging upside down. That means that when the egg is fertilized and the sporophyte plant is going to grow, it's going to grow like this, which is what I'll show you on the next slide. See, upside down, and here you go. Parts of the sporophyte plant that we've already covered, right? Foot. So here, this whole thing here, sporophyte plant hanging upside down because it's in a liverwort, still has a foot, still has a seta, still has a sporangium with all the spores, which is where all the spores will be made, right? Via meiosis. Okay. Eventually the sporophyte. So this, remember, this whole thing is sporophyte. Where is the sporophyte? It's attached to the gametophyte, right? Because it's dependent on it, since we're talking about non-vascular plants. Eventually the sporophyte will make spores inside of its sporangia. And the spores will be released. Here's spores being released. And those spores, which are haploid, are going to grow into the spores that are haploid. See them up here? Are going to grow into your gametophyte plants. Here's your female gametophyte plant. Here's your male gametophyte plant. That's where we started. I'm going to show you here, this will help. So we just learned about mosses and liverworts. And so if you're going to compare them side by side, using the same colors. So where's the moss gametophyte plant? It's the green fluffy. Where's the liverwort gametophyte plant? It's usually like kind of a green flat thing, right? But in this case, we're also dealing with these new structures. So these new structures are also part of the gametophyte plant, this Archegonia-4. So this, what I'm drawing here in orange, is actually like this up here, Archegonia-4. Anyways, the point is, where is the sporophyte plant? In the mosses, sporophyte plant is attached to the gametophyte plant and has a seta and a capsule. Whereas in the liverworts, it's attached to the gametophyte plant, but it hangs upside down like a bat. That's what I'm just trying to show you on this. Okay, this is the last thing we're doing, hornworts. Hornworts won't take as long. I promise, you're hanging in there well. So why are they called hornworts? So hornworts are still non-vascular plants. They're called hornworts because they have these horns. So the sporophyte plants, oh, I should use blue, look like horns. That's why we call them a hornwort. Hornworts are in the phylum Anthocerophyta. The way I remember the word Anthocerophyta is that, so maybe you've heard of like a Triceratops, like that dinosaur. Triceratops has 3 horns, tri, and then cero. Tri means 3 and cero means horn. So Anthocerophyta, if you wanted to break it down, phyta means plant. Or sorry, this is phylum name. So phylum of the horn flower. That's kind of what it means, but I remember it by just seeing the sero and thinking triceratops. So they're in the phylum Anthocerophyta. This is them here. You see these kind of brownish horns in the middle? That's them. Where do you find hornworts? Same places you find the other ones we covered today, the mosses and the liverworts. You find them growing on rocks. You find them growing on other plants. You find them growing on new habitats, like if there's a mudslide or a volcanic explosion or something like that. Or if a whole area just gets paved, right? Maybe you had an area that somebody came in and they're going to make development there and they paved it all. That's still new habitat too. And liverworts, mosses, and hornworts can live there too. Just like the mosses and the liverworts, hornworts can grow on other plants as epiphytes. And just like the ones before, the liverworts, you can actually find hornworts in urban environments too, like Newark. So this picture on the left is not super great. I get it. But trust me, in that you see all these kind of spiky things, those are actually hornworts growing right outside of, I think, Smith Hall. And the reason I couldn't get any closer is because I was on crutches for that semester, and so I couldn't climb the little wall to get closer. But yeah, this was the first time I'd ever seen hornworts growing in real life, as versus at a botanical garden or something. And it was also in Newark. So it just shows, once you start to get to know these plants, you'll be surprised of where you'll be when you see them. All right, so so this here is the Gametophyte plant, similar to a liverwort in that it's kind of flat and green. But the main difference is that the sporophytes of hornworts are these horn-shaped structures. Just like the mosses and just like the liverworts, the gametophyte is dominant, but also non-vascular, right? So in this picture here, the green blobby stuff at the bottom is the Gametophyte plant. They're also small, like, right? Here's our dime again, right? Very small plants. They have their sex organs located on the top surface. That makes sense because the other part is facing the dirt or the tree or the rock, right? Like this part here, the bottom surface, would be attached to like a tree or a rock or soil. So it makes sense that the sex organs are located at the top surface or the dorsal surface. Remember, dorsal fin. Okay, so just as a little try, I know we just learned about sex organs in plants today, in that we learned about Archegonia and Antheridia, right? Archegonia are the female sex organs that have an egg inside. Antheridia are the male sex organs that make sperm. So if you had to guess, just based on what you've known today, and I told you, if you had to guess, and it's okay if you get it wrong, don't be scared. But if you had to guess, and I said to you, this here is one sex organ, which one would you think it is? Would you think it would be an Antheridia or an Archegonia, if you had to guess? Antheridia. Yeah, Jamil, you're right. So do you want to like explain why you think it is that? Or what was your clue? Did you have a clue as to, well, okay. Fair enough. That's so, but then no, that's getting us off track. So you are right. It is the Antheridia. That's correct. And I'll write it here. So it is Antheridia. This is one Antheridium. So you are correct in that. The way you would know, at least the way I would know, is that there's no visible egg. All I see here is I'll use the same colors as before. Well, I see a little stalk, and both both of them have a stalk, right? Both the Antheridium, which is male, and then the Archegonia, which is female sex organs. Both of those have a stalk. Okay, so that's not giving us any clue. Then this one, I don't see any egg in here. All I see in here is all this like uniform tissue. And so to me, that's my clue that that's that sperm producing tissue. See, the tissue looks uniform. There's no visible egg. You might argue me and say, like, this kind of looks like a neck. Sure, it kind of does, but it's a stalk and there's no egg inside here. It's just homogeneous uniform tissue. All right, that was mostly to see if anyone was still awake. Do bryophytes make roots? No, they don't. So if you're a non-vascular plant, you can't make anything like that. Non-vascular plants don't have stems. They don't have true stems. They don't have true leaves, and they don't have true roots. That's a great question. Okay, we're almost done. We're almost done. Hang in there. Yep, hang in there. We're almost done. So if we're going to talk about the sporophyte of a hornwort, remember, the first thing you should remember is that it's shaped like a horn, which is very convenient. The parts of it are that it has a foot. So here, this is a close-up. If we were to do a close-up of where the sporophyte attaches to the gametophyte plant, the sporophyte being the horn, it has a foot. Blue is not a good choice here, so I'm going to have to use a different color. It has a foot. And it has a horn, right? A horn, which we can't see all of it, but it grows out there. It doesn't have a seta, no seta. So instead it has an area of growth that's called a basal meristem. It's okay if you don't know basal meristem. What I'm trying to show you though is that it grows from the base. So it grows, the sporophyte grows in this. Sorry, that's not a good way to do it. The sporophyte grows from the bottom, So think about it like this. It's kind of like if the top gets broken, so like if this horn gets broken, it doesn't matter because it's growing from the bottom. And that's what this is. That's what this thing is involved in. I don't really care so much about that. Okay. Let's see. If you did a cross section through the horn, the spore producing tissues in the middle. Another thing that maybe you should note is that hornworts do have the stomatal apparatus. So there was a question at the top of the class as to whether these plants had stoma or stomata. Mosses do not, liverworts do not, hornworts do. Hornworts do on the sporophyte plant. We covered this, don't worry about this. Spores are going to get released from the top of the horn. That's because the top of the horn is the oldest tissue. Remember, the horn grows from the base. Here is showing you the stomatal apparatus in the hornwort. I don't really care that much about that. Just to get you oriented. This is the gametophyte down here. Each of these things is sporophyte coming out that's shaped like a horn. Notice that the spores are getting released from the top because the horn is growing from the bottom. Okay. Yes. Here's spores getting released from the top of a horn. Here is a drawing of, because we don't have the fancy diagram as before, but just to walk you through it quickly. Here's your gametophyte, I guess I should use the same color. Here's your gametophyte plant of a hornwort. On the gametophyte plant, there's going to be male sex organs and female sex organs on the gametophyte plant because the gametophyte plant makes gametes. The male sex organs or the Antheridia are going to make sperm. Female sex organs or Archegonium are going to make egg. Sperm will swim to the egg. When that happens, you get the new Sporophyte plant, which will grow as a horn out of the gametophyte plant. Here it is, growing as a horn. Okay. Wow, this is good. It just gives you the comparison of the 3 sporophyte plants that we covered today on one slide. And lastly, today we focused a lot on sperm and egg, right? Sexual reproduction, sperm and egg. These non-vascular plants are also able to reproduce with asexual means. A means without. So this is reproduction without sex. That's what I just said. No egg and sperm. If you're reproducing without sex, you're not reproducing with egg and sperm. You don't need any egg and sperm if you're reproducing without sex. If you are reproducing without sex, though, you're basically making clones of yourself. And so these 3 plants that we talked about today, the mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, can do this. They can do asexual reproduction and make clones of themselves. Don't worry about that. So there's 2 ways that asexual reproduction can occur. Either the gametophyte plant just gets broken into bits and each new bit will grow into a new gametophyte plant. Or we have these things called gemmy cups and gemmy that are found in liverworts and some mosses. So this is a liverwort close up. Each of these, I guess red's not good to use. I'll use yellow. Each of the, nope, yellow's not good. I'll use black. Each of these little cup-like things is a gemma cup. And inside of the gemma cup is these little jelly bean things that look like, that are called gemmy. And those little gemmy, so here you go. This is a cross section. Here is the gemmy cup. And inside is all this little gemmy. And each of these little gemmy are basically bits of the plant that can grow into a new plant. So I'll just show you real quick and then we're done. Oh my gosh. See, I bet you wishing for those pre-recorded lectures now. Here, let me just put this. And I'm pulling this up. I'm just gonna share it after I get the ad done. Yeah. Good for you. Okay, hold on. So let me make this, let me share you guys. So I'll stop sharing that and share this. Yep, share. All right, make it big. I don't think there's sound, but we'll just do it. Okay, so I just showed you about gemmy cup and gemmy, right? Hopefully you can see the video. And so here, this whole thing here is a gemmy cup on a liverwort. And you might see these little dots inside. I'm pointing to a dot right there. There's like a bunch of little dots inside. Those are the gemmy. And so what's going to happen is a water drop is going to drop into this gemmy cup and it's going to splash the gemmy out. So let's watch. Boom. Splashes the gemmy out. And so each of these gemmy, here's one flying, can land somewhere and grow into a whole new liverwort plant via asexual reproduction. So a whole new clone of whatever this plant was can grow from that little gemmy. So it's an example of asexual reproduction. Oh boy. Okay. Now I'll go back here and share this. So we did it. That's it for today. Man. So today's class was pretty long. Next class is also similarly long, but next class will be pre-recorded so you can kind of pace yourself a little bit better than we did today. Quiz number 6, which is on this lecture, is available on Canvas now. It's due on Friday before midnight. Please do the assignments. They're meant to help your grade. Please refer to the way that turning in assignments affects your grade. And next class, we'll talk about the seedless vascular plants and the gymnosperms. And as I said, stay focused. We're almost done, really. I mean, we only have 8 total lectures in this class. I know, in a very short period of time. And we already just now finished 6. So we have 7 and we have 8, and then that's it. So your second lecture exam is 2 weeks from today. And I will be posting a study guide either today or I already did, I'm not sure, but it will be available to you very soon. So you'll have a study guide for 2 weeks as you prepare for the next lecture exam. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer it here. If not, thank you so much for hanging in there. I know it's a long, summer classes are hard. They're hard. I know we all have many things we're doing. Me too. I mean, I have a day job and I'm, personal life stuff too. So I get it. It is hard. But luckily it's short if there's a silver lining. So thank you guys so much. Have a great night. And it's Wednesday, right? Today's Wednesday. So have a good weekend. I won't see you again until after the weekend. So have a great weekend. My sister's getting married this weekend. So I'm excited about that.
Professor, can I ask you a question about the exam, or should I email you? Is it emailing better for you, or?
You can ask me here. Other people might have the same question, so that's fine.
I have a question. So one of the questions was saying which specialized stem does not help a plant to store food. So we had tuber, corm, bulb, and runner. Which one was the answer to that question?
What was, so
it is
which one does not do storing food?
Yeah.
It would be runner.
Runner?
Yeah, what? Because tuber is like a sweet potato. So that's to store food. Corm is also to corm is also to kind of store food because it allows the plant to live under the ground during the winter time. And then what was the other option?
Bulb.
Bulb. Same thing as the corm. So corm, bulb, same idea. That's like an onion or a garlic bulb. Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Whereas like a runner is like a stem whose job it is to make another plant somewhere else. So if any of you
that confused me too.
Okay. So if anyone's ever grown like strawberry plants, or if anybody has ever had a spider plant, if you've ever seen a strawberry plant grow, it sends off those little stems where there's a whole nother plant attached to that little stem. And the same thing with a spider plant. So those stems that a new plant shows up at the end, that stem's called a runner.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, I gotta go rest my voice.
Thank you.
Please email me if you have any questions, guys. Take care.